My name is Winnie, and I am so lucky to be the rector of this fine church, and thank you all for honoring us with your presence this evening. We are so honored today to have you with us and to have Rabbi Sharon Brous with us, and we are doing this as part of a partnership that we have with the Temple and with Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is also a great honoring for us here at St. Luke's. So a few things that I get to say as the rector. One is, if you go through those back doors and to your left, you will find washrooms. And use the one you need. If you go back there are also books to buy if you haven't done that yet. So please do go back there to buy books if you would like to buy books. There is a question and answer period, and the way we're going to do that, that maintains the civility of the room, is there are cards in front of you in your pew rack. You can see the little white cards, note cards, there's some pens, you probably have pens. If you have questions or things that you want us to address, if you would write them down as legibly as you can, and there are ushers and greeters that are going down the aisles. Basically, Ann Kramer is here watching out for you. Yeah. Ann will take care of it, and then she's going to get those up here and help organize them, and we will make sure that we get to as many of those as we can. At about 8 o'clock, maybe a little bit earlier, we're going to bring a table out here, and Rabbi Brous is going to sign books. So do have a look at how many of you there are, and help us with the fact that she's got to get somewhere, and let's do the best we can to share a lot of love and time really quickly, as well as you can. But that table will be here, so you don't have to go anywhere. And again, Ann and that crew will help guide us forward, so don't worry, we won't leave you behind. We're going to have everybody come forward and back. If you go to church here and if you've ever taken communion, it's going to be like that. That's what we're doing. So you can help guide others. Again, we're so pleased that you're here, and we're going to start with a welcome from John Vaughn from Ebenezer and then Peter Berg from the Temple. Thank you, Winnie. I bring you greetings from Ebenezer Baptist Church, our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, and the members of Ebenezer. It is good to be here. I've been here enough. I should have given the washroom the directions. It feels like we know where they are. But I think it speaks to the importance of this partnership that we have with you all here at St. Luke's, and also with the other co-sponsor of this, the Temple. And we were just saying how wonderful it is that our three congregations have begun to build this deeper and deeper relationship. And I think for us, not just in terms of how do we build bridges across difference, but we've got some big issues to take on, and we can't do this by ourselves. And we can only do it together. And we are indeed grateful for that. So I welcome you on behalf of the Ebenezer part of this program, and now I get a chance to welcome Rabbi Peter Berg from the Temple.
Thank you, Reverend, Rector. It is great to be here. It sounds like a joke. A reverend, a rabbi, and a rector walked into a bar. It is great to be here. I actually had some remarks planned, and I'm not going to give them because I just spent the last hour speaking with Rabbi Brous, and it is incumbent on me to sit down immediately and for her to take this seat. I can't wait for you to hear her presentation. I want to underscore how important it is for these three historic congregations to be together tonight, not only for this important talk, but also for the good work that we're able to do together, from ending gun violence, and the list goes on and on and on. I cannot think of three congregations who, putting their hand and their head and their hearts together, can do more good work for humankind and for this planet than these three. And it's an honor to roll up my sleeves every day to do this good work with you, to do God's work together. And I hope that you'll take the words from this important book to heart, because we live in a very difficult and challenging world where there is an awful lot of hurt and anger, and this book is a recipe for what we can do together. So it's not, we shouldn't take for granted the fact that we're actually here doing this work that this book speaks about. It couldn't be more important, and it couldn't be more timely, and I hope that we'll take the message and the charge and leave this sanctuary empowered to make a difference in this community and this world. In a moment, we're going to introduce Rabbi Brous, but I just want to say what a personal privilege it is as the rabbi in the room to welcome her to this church. I've known Rabbi Brous for a very long time. We were actually in youth group together. So I first met her in 1987 when we were neither rabbis nor grown-ups. Someone's going to, I'm sure, do a formal introduction in a minute, but what I can tell you is this. She is the most important rabbi in the United States of America, and this book is the most important book right now. And I'm so honored to be here.
That's what I was going to say. That is so true, right? I'm so honored by our relationship, what we get to do together. So what we're going to do now is there is a song on the back of your card. You got a card when you came in and gave it to you. And I was in Bethlehem a few years ago with a group of rabbis and Baptist ministers and one Episcopal priest, all women. And the rabbis asked if we knew this song. And all the Christians rolled their eyes with like, oh yeah, like we know about praise music. And the rabbis sang it anyway and kind of restored it for us. And they said we sing it all the time. So we're going to give it a try, and Matthew's going to lead us.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Lord, prepare a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you.
Thank you all. That was amazing. Peter Berg basically said what needs to be said about Sharon Brous. Rabbi Brous, as Peter just said, is the most important rabbi in this country right now, who has written the most important religious book of the year. And when you can say that in January, which is what happened, that is quite a book. Yeah, good luck to everybody else who is going to publish this year. So for anyone that has not looked this up, but I'm sure you all have, Rabbi Sharon Brous is the senior and founding rabbi of the Icar community, a leading edge, isn't that interesting, Jewish community based in Los Angeles, and the author of The Amen Effect. I think the thing that you need to know about what it means to be a voice like this, both in this country and in the world, when we think about that in our religious communities, most of us come out of, you think of that leadership as coming out of the tradition, right? That the presiding bishop comes from, is in our church, is a lifelong Episcopalian, comes from a heritage of our church. Rabbi Brous has asked the question of what purpose can religion serve in this country, and has decided and has convinced many of us that religion can be a healing force in this country, as many of us in this room believe, despite the history of all of our faith traditions, that that's actually possible and is actually our driving source and is the reason that we exist. Brous is known to many of us here because she was in the inaugural cohort of the Auburn Seminary Fellows, which is when many of us first learned of her work. That group includes Brian McLaren, William Barber, Jackie Lewis, Valerie Kaur, among the great social justice leaders, I guess again, the premier social justice leaders of this country stepping up from faith traditions. In the world, she is the person who goes to pray at the White House when people like Barack Obama or Joe Biden are elected and need to pray and celebrate their election. She has led the Passover Seder at the White House. For me, the power of Sharon Brous is that she has sparked a rethinking of what is possible from our religious communities in this country. And even internationally, I saw a list where you are among the top 50 most influential Jews in the world. Like, what a remarkable claim, which is outside of even the impact of just our religious communities.
My mom wrote that list, so.
Yeah. I really enjoyed my conversation with your mother. Yeah. And Rabbi Brous went to Jewish Theological Seminary, which is over by Union Theological Seminary, where the other half of us in this room went, which is a great Columbia and Jewish Theological Seminary and Union Theological Seminary and the Cathedral are this great kind of mix of contemporary thought and real vision for what the world can be. So you come to us known in some ways, and we are so honored to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and I think in part because I came in with Reverend Ed Bacon and Hope and Reverend John Vaughn. When I walked in, there was a glory attack, and I feel it. I'm feeling it right now. So thank you so much for hosting me here. I'm so glad to be in Atlanta, to Rabbi Peter Berg, my friend, and really to you, Winnie. I'm so grateful. My new friend, I have to say. I'm so moved by your leadership and so grateful for the beautiful multi-faith work of this city, which is really a beacon and a great inspiration. And I feel very honored to be your guest tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. So I asked Rabbi Brous to give a book talk because we're all here to hear her, and she insisted on a conversation. So I'm going to try to turn it to a book talk, so we'll see what we can do. So you told me, or we read your call story.
Yes.
Tell us about your call story, and tell us about becoming religious as an adult and what it has meant to be a woman who is a rabbi.
Did folks see that Ben Stiller movie like 2 decades ago called Keeping the Faith? About the relationship between a rabbi and a priest, and they talk about their call story, and the priest is so clear that he was called by God, and the rabbi's like, I just liked learning. I don't know what you mean by the calling. We don't really use that language, but I really had a calling. I really felt, I had an epiphany. I had a moment that certainly was, now I can look back and see how all of the decisions I had made in my life led me to be in a moment that I could have that calling. But I had a realization that the people I admired most in the world who were great agents for change were people who had a faith narrative that was at the core of their activism. They were people who really felt driven by a story that included the redemption of the human community. And I realized in that moment that I too had a story, and that my story had been part of my life from my childhood, but I had never really thought about it that way. And for me as a Jew, the story is the story of the Exodus from Egypt. It is the story that comprises 4 of the 5 books of the Torah. It is the story that we recall every single Friday night as we bring in Shabbat. When we say Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, we remember the Exodus from Egypt, the idea that our ancestors were enslaved and then redeemed, and able to go on a journey from enslavement to freedom, from narrowness to expansiveness, from darkness to light, is the core narrative that is part of my life. And when I realized that my junior year in college, when I was studying in Jerusalem, and it kind of knocked me off my feet. And I realized that I had to pursue a path that was different from what I had imagined. I was a kid who at 5 realized I was going to be a civil rights attorney. So I really wanted to, I didn't know Brian Stevenson at the time, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go work with Brian and help folks. And then my junior year had this realization, and I had to start from scratch because I really was functionally illiterate as a Jew. I mean, I had a strong sense of Jewish identity, but didn't know text, didn't know liturgy, and I had then the great benefit of being able to learn everything for the first time, really, as kind of an adult. So concepts like every single human being is created in God's own image, which every kid learns, the first day of religious school. I don't remember ever having learned that until I was 20. And I thought, oh my God, say it again? Like every person is created in God's own image. What does that mean about the way that this world looks and who we're called to be in relationship to one another? And it was an incredibly moving journey that sort of set off from that point. And part of that journey also was falling in love, like Ben Stiller from the movie, with learning. I started studying Talmud for the first time during that junior year. I was completely taken by the arguments and the sort of strange, the strange behaviors of my ancestors, my rabbinic ancestors. They became my best friends. I knew them deeply and intimately. I mean, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan and Hillel versus Shammai, I began to really live with these ancient men as my dear friends. And it didn't take long for me to realize that as much as I was absorbed in the world of their stories, that my story also was not reflected among theirs, which could have sent me running as a young woman, but instead made me feel this sense of I was propelled to add my voice. I felt like our tradition was crying out for the voices that had never been room for before. There were people like me who existed, I'm sure of it, over the course of the last 2,000 years, but our voices were never written down. And it's not just women, it's all kinds of people who lived in the margins, who weren't the people who had the power. And there's this idea about the black letters on the page and then the white space in between the letters, and what story is being told in the gaps in between the words and the stories that are written down. And I just felt called to add my voice. And I remember one day I was sitting in the Beit Midrash in the study hall with my chavruta, my study partner, once I started seminary. And we were reading a text, and it was so painful for me to read something that our rabbis had written about women's bodies. And he was untroubled, and I was deeply troubled to the point of, I couldn't really move. And I was struggling with how can it be that these sacred texts, which are so inspiring and are the source of life and sustenance, also hold this kind of petty misogyny and smallness, and how can that be? And I started to cry, and I remember that a teardrop fell off my face and landed on my Gemara, on my Talmud, and I just thought, that too is holy, that these pages need to be wrinkled by the tears of people crying, not only from the beauty of it, but also from the pain, and that becomes part of the story too. And I think that's a little bit of the journey, is kind of taking ownership of my own place in the tradition while also kind of pushing the walls out, expanding the tradition so it makes room for the rest of us, because we're not all represented by what's been written down, but it's intended for all of us. And can we make it big enough for us too?
Why did you assume it was intended for all of us?
First of all, because I know that it's my inheritance. I know that it's my inheritance. And I was very early on moved by the work of David Steindl-Rast, a Benedictine monk, who many of you might know and admire also. And Steindl-Rast describes that every faith tradition begins like a volcanic eruption. It is beautiful and powerful and fiery and dangerous. There's some kind of powerful, mystical happening that occurs. And then the lava falls down the side of the mountain, and then it settles. And if you walk by, maybe 100 or 200 or 300 years later, it just looks like cold, dead rock. But in fact, it has sacred fire beneath. And so he writes that the job of every faith practitioner today is to take out a chisel and start chiseling away and find the fire inside. And I knew enough at that time, when I started to kind of fall in love with my tradition at the same time that I was weeping over it, to know that this was mine too. But that what I could see at the surface was not actually intended for my eyes, but what lived underneath it, the fire underneath it was. My tradition is a patriarchal tradition that was written down by men and transmitted from one generation of men to another generation of men until one day I'm sitting in the Beit Midrash in the study hall looking at it saying, how could they say that about me and my body, Yeah. And so I always had a sense that it was mine, but that I couldn't live in the tight confines of the tradition. I had to let it breathe a little bit, and I had to trust that it wouldn't break if it stretched a little bit to make room for me and for the rest of us.
Did you have models for that?
Of course. I mean, I think in so many traditions, the people who are the most interesting ones are the people who are trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit, to my mind. I didn't have a rabbinic model per se. That was really, my rabbi is Reverend Ed Bacon, so
We got to get him a little hat.
Literally, if I may, I know this is a sacred place also for Ed, who's beloved in this Atlanta community and also all around the world. But when I moved to Los Angeles as a young rabbi, I was totally uprooted from New York and couldn't have been more upset about it. I had finished a fellowship in New York that required that I leave the Upper West Side. And I thought, okay, I'll go to LA for 6 months and then I'm back to the Upper West Side, my place of origin. And there was a rabbi who lived just across the way from me. And when I moved in, I thought, oh, maybe I'll get an invitation for a meal, or at least he'll say hello. Nothing. But Ed Bacon, the Reverend, who was out in Pasadena, immediately when I moved there, called me up and said, as we were just talking about at dinner, hey sister, heard you just moved here. Heard there's a new rabbi in town. When are you coming to church? And I literally sat in that church and was transformed by the faith of this rector, this pastor, and his preaching and his beautiful community. And actually that night, pieces started coming together for me as well. It was Christmas. And can I talk about Christmas?
Please.
Okay. So Ed Bacon delivered a sermon about a young couple that was so poor and so marginalized by their society that she went into labor and nobody made room for them in the inn. And she had to give birth on the lawn outside. And what a disgrace that is. And he said, this is the work for all of us for the rest of our lives, that we need to make sure that we see the one who's outside, who desperately needs someone to offer up their bed. And again, I'm weeping, thinking, my God, I love that story. And that's not my story, that's Ed's story. And I also have mine. And the beauty of this is that our stories are on parallel tracks to the same redemptive vision at the end. A world in which nobody's left outside, right? When they should be brought into the inn and have room made for them.
I didn't know that I didn't know that about Ed, so thank you. That's amazing. So All Saints Pasadena.
I I have many more Ed Bacon stories if we get there.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
see. We'll
Yeah.
see where this story,
I'll
where
do
this
the best I
conversation
can,
goes.
to draw those out. So All Things Pasadena was one of your models for what was possible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So how'd you decide to do it, to start a community?
Well, the truth is, when I moved out, I kept meeting these incredibly interesting, vibrant, creative, smart, wonderful young Jews, and none of them were going to synagogue for some reason. And I didn't understand why, because I knew that there were great synagogues and there were really good things happening. And I realized that this was a generation, this was 2004, where there was a kind of institutional allergy, where people did not trust that their hearts would be held with care, that they would be inspired, that they would be stimulated, that there would be the kind of people in these spaces that they wanted to be with. And I just thought, my God, we're literally losing a whole generation of people right now. I mean, I was a 29-year-old rabbi at the time. And so one night I met Maya Wergelis's parents. Maya's somewhere here tonight, my dear friend from Los Angeles. And Maya was 11, and her parents said to me, you know what? We haven't found what we're looking for in the institutional spaces, but we want our kids to be proud of their Judaism. Can you train, can you work with them, and then they'll become bat mitzvah one day in the backyard or something? And I said, I don't really want to do that, but what I really want to do is I want to transform the way that we think about community. I want faith to actually speak to the thousands of people who are hungry for spiritual connection, for ritual, for community. And I think we can do it in a different way. And we shared this vision, and we were all so excited. And literally, Maya's mother, Melissa, sent me home, and she said, go write down your vision for what's possible in the Jewish community. We haven't even gotten to the book yet, friends.
There's time.
Because I think we could just talk for hours. And I literally wrote this down. I said, we are living in a time in which religion in the public space is increasingly defined by insularity, extremism, and even violence. And precisely at the moment when our institutions need to provide a counter-testimony to that kind of cruelty and regression, our institutions are becoming more and more cowardly. And what we have to do is reclaim the prophetic voice. We have to be brave. We have to be full of joy. We have to know how to dance together, how to laugh together, how to cry together. If you're interested, come on Friday night. Let's see what we can do. And we set up 20 folding chairs. 135 people came. And then I gave notice at my job. I'm like, I'll finish out the school year. I was working at a school, and we're gonna build something. And we just took a leap. We got really lucky. Now I look back at my 29-year-old self, and I'm like, oh God, don't do that. But we had faith. I mean, we really did have faith. We believed that there was a hunger, there was a sacred hunger, and that people needed to figure out, what does it mean to be a Jew and to be a human being in a world on fire? And as I do write a little bit about this in the intro to the book, but I set out to answer two questions. One was, how can we mine our Jewish inheritance to live lives of meaning and purpose? This is the chisel and the dead rock. And who are we called to be? What does our history and our Jewish tradition and our sacred text demand of us in a time of moral crisis? And somewhere at the intersection of those two questions, the community was born.
Yeah. So we will talk about the book, because we should talk about the book. But maybe one more thing before that. Tell us what it's been like to travel with this book in this time.
Oh, okay. So the book is about love and loss and community and connection. And the book was originally supposed to come out September 2024, end of September. And my editor called me up in a stroke of good thinking and said, you know, this is going to be a very contentious presidential election. Literally nobody will be able to hear this beautiful, quiet voice saying, folks, we can do better, you know. So she said, can you get it done 9 months early? We're going to get it out in January. She said, it is going to be a nice, quiet time. The whole world's going to be receptive to messages about love and healing. And so we did. I closed the manuscript like 14 months ago. And now the book, of course, comes out in a very painful and tumultuous time. And it's been so powerful to travel with the book and to just be with people who are hurting so much. I mean, good people who are really just trying to figure out how to hold our sorrow and our fear and our hope and our dreams and our broken hearts. And the whole book really is, how do we responsibly hold each other's broken hearts? How do we navigate the most difficult times? And I feel like we're doing that in real time together, and it's a gift. And I know I have lots of friends who have books, and they say, like, just arrange beforehand to get pulled out before the book signing, you know, like pre-sign. And I'm like, but I want to talk to the people. And I want it because so much comes through. And like, I feel like we're building relationships and doing the work in every stop, every time we're connecting and speaking. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, and connected to that, if you all, so I think we're going to hit all the things, but if there's something you're worried we're not going to say, I don't know where Ann Kramer is, but she's somewhere. Wave your card, there she is, and we'll get it up here, and someone will bring it up. So do that if you need to do that. So let's talk about the book. Let's just start really basically. What is the Amen Effect?
Okay. So the premise of the book is that we are living through a time of multiple intersecting crises. At the heart of it is the loneliness crisis. This is, as we know from the Surgeon General's repeated, very powerful pronouncements about this, we are living through an epidemic of loneliness, social alienation, and isolation. We now know that it's not only breaking our hearts, but it's actually destroying our bodies, that experiencing acute loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's doing real damage to our hearts, to our lungs, and as Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century philosopher, says, loneliness and social alienation and isolation are preconditions for totalitarianism. That tyrannical regimes, conspiracy theories cannot take hold in environments in which people know and trust their neighbors, in which we live in proximity with each other in a spiritual way. And so what I see is that the condition of our time is not only breaking our spirits and our bodies, it threatens to break our democracy. So what we know is that before COVID, literally 30% of Americans said that they did not know the names of their next door neighbors. And 20% of Americans said that they did not have one confidant in the world, not one person who they could share their fear, their angst, their sorrow, their love with. So we're in a crisis. This is even a pre-COVID crisis. This is like even in the pre-world. So what the Amen Effect essentially argues is that it is imperative and urgent that we figure out how to find our way to one another in celebration, in sorrow, and in solidarity. That is the call of our time, and that every one of us actually has the power to do this. It's rooted in one particular ancient ritual. Can I share the framework for it? So this is a ritual that I encountered first when I was in rabbinical school, when I was a seminary student in my 20s. And I have to say, I remember seeing the text. It comes from the Mishnah, ancient Jewish compendium of law, codified in the year 220 CE. So this is really ancient text that is talking about an even older ritual. I saw this text, and I saw it, and I thought, there's something else going on here. This has got to be deeper than it appears, and I couldn't figure it out. And I think now, in retrospect, I hadn't lived enough life to understand it really yet. I literally photocopied it, folded it up, and put it back in my Mishnah and put it back on the shelf. And then we moved to LA. We built the community. I had a few babies. I officiated at a lot of weddings. I helped a lot of folks through divorce. I buried a lot of people. And one day I opened this book up, and the piece of paper comes out. And I saw it and thought, oh my God, I know exactly what this is saying. So here's the ritual. In the ancient times, Jews used to go up for pilgrimage in Jerusalem. So they would come from all across the land and the diaspora. They would ascend to Jerusalem, which is, of course, a city on a hill. And there was this joyous, festive spirit in the whole city. And then they would climb the steps of the Temple Mount, the most sacred place in the most sacred city. And then they would enter through this giant arch entryway, like the one you just came in. And they would come in and they would turn to the right and they would circle all the way around the perimeter of the courtyard. Hundreds of thousands of people at once. And then they would leave, basically in the same place that they had just come in. That was their pilgrimage ritual. Except the text says, for somebody with a broken heart. That person would go up to Jerusalem, would ascend the steps of the Temple Mount, would go through the same entryway, but would turn to the left when everyone else turned to the right, and would walk against the current. And masses of people would be going this way, and the broken-hearted person would go this way. And when they encountered one another, the people who were going to the right would ask a simple question. They would say in Hebrew, Ma lach, what happened to you? Why does your heart hurt? What does the world look like from your perspective? And the people who are going this way would answer saying, Ani avel, I am a mourner. I just lost my loved one and I'm just upside down. I can't even figure out how to walk in this world without him. Or my partner just left and I feel totally blindsided by this. Or I'm just worried sick about my kid. And I just need someone to tell me that she's going to be okay. Or I just feel so alone and I don't think there's anyone in the world who even knows me deeply. Whatever they would say, the people who are going this way would look into their eyes and then offer them a blessing. They would say, may the one who dwells in this holy place hold you with love as you navigate this chapter of darkness. Or they would say, may you be surrounded by friends and loved ones and community, even as you walk through this dark chapter. Or they would say, I know you feel alone, but may you know that you are loved. And then they'd go on, and that was the end of the ritual. And I realized, as I re-encountered this text 10, 12 years after I had originally seen it, that the rabbis were writing with such a profound psychological insight, because nobody who's participating in this ritual wants to be doing what they're doing. The person who is bereft, bereaved, ill, lonely, broken, the last thing that she wants to do is get out of bed and get all dressed up and show up in a place where there are hundreds of thousands of people. And yet she has to. She doesn't stay home, she goes. And when she gets there, she can't turn to the right like everybody else and pretend that she's okay, because she's not okay. And the text says, you have to be honest about your pain. And you have to trust that your heart will be held by a community of care. And the people who are going this way, who literally are having the time of their lives, and in researching the book, I started reading a lot about the Hajj and what the pilgrimage to Mecca is like, and I was reading pilgrims' accounts of what they experience and just the holiness of being swept up in this massive humanity. Like you are just but a small speck of this human community that's like in the sacred flow together, and then all of a sudden you're going to step out of the flow and see this poor like shmagegi who's walking in the other direction. That's like a Jewish word for like, I don't know, broken person or something. And you're going to stop and say, hey stranger, tell me about your heart. What's going on with you? And then tend to their heart and like then try and catch up with your family. Like, it's so counterintuitive. And there's so many good reasons why when we're brokenhearted, we don't want to expose ourselves with that much vulnerability, and why when we're okay, we don't want to encounter someone else's vulnerability, because it forces us to confront our own, because we're afraid that the pain is contagious, because we think we'll say the wrong thing, because we don't want to remind them of how broken they are by asking them, what if they're having a good day, And so we all avoid it. It seems like this ritual is saying to us, it's exactly because it is counterinstinctual that it matters. You just show up. You just lean toward relationship at precisely the moment that your instinct is pulling you away from each other. And that's the heart of the book. And every chapter of all the 8 chapters is looking at some different aspect of why it's so hard and why it's so essential that we place ourselves in that sacred circle, whether we are walking to the right because we're pretty okay right now, or we're walking to the left because our hearts are broken today. And the secret about the human condition is that we will all be walking in this direction and also in this direction at some point in our lives. And that's the gift that we can give each other, is showing up for each other when we are.
I'm going to awkwardly, yeah. Thank you. I'm going to awkwardly read these while I ask you the next question. One of the phrases that just caught me off guard is it's Malach Hagar. Tell me about angels. That line, I looked at it over and over. Oh my God.
Oh, great. Yeah. So, you know the story of Hagar and Ishmael when Abraham is told by Sarah that he needs to expel Hagar and Ishmael from the house because Ishmael's behaving in a way that we don't know exactly what he was doing. The text indicates that he was playing with his little brother, but then the rabbis have all kinds of things to say about that and why it was important that they be expelled from the house. And God tells Abraham, listen to Sarah. And so Hagar and Ishmael are sent out of the home, and they're sent out into the desert, and they just have a little thing of water, and they finish the water, and she's devastated because she's convinced that she and her son are going to die in the desert. And she puts the boy down, and she moves away a little bit, and she's just weeping and wailing, and then an angel comes to her, and the angel says to her, essentially, Hagar, like, what's going on? And Hagar's like, I'm devastated because I'm going to die and my boy's going to die. And the angel says, lift up your eyes, Hagar, and there's a well of water that's right in front of her. And of course, was the well of water always there? And she was so devastated that she couldn't see it, because sometimes when we're that upside down, we can't even see the help that's right in front of us. Or did a miracle happen for Hagar and the well appeared? We don't know. But it saves her life, and it saves Ishmael's life. And of course, he goes on to have a great line of descendants after him too, many, many, many generations. But in the story, when the angel comes and gives her this fuel, like shows her that she can live in this moment of desperation, the question that the angel asks in the Hebrew is Malach, Hagar. At some point, as I'm deep in my obsession with this Mishnah, this ancient text, at some point I realize, I see this in Genesis, and I realize, my God, the angel says to Hagar the same thing that we're supposed to say to each other when we're walking around that sacred circle. The angel is in the position that generations later would be built into a ritual that seems to be saying to me that we are all called to be angels to one another, to show up the way that angel showed up for Hagar, this person who is destitute and despairing and feels like there's nothing for her in this world, and then just a simple tap on the shoulder that says, hey, the help you need is actually right here, right? There is a way out of this for you. That person who, with the simple question, is able to totally reinvigorate Hagar. And the word in Hebrew for angel is malach. And so it just so happens. Now, the rabbi, if you didn't gasp just now,
right, then
you're not thinking like a rabbi, because for the rabbis, Peter Berg gasped.
Shocking. It's shocking.
Because for the rabbis, that is like an incredible, we love wordplay, and the fact that the word for angel is malach, and that's the word that one is supposed to say as an invitation to the brokenhearted to find their way into love and connection and community. It just is absolutely astonishing to me. And I realized it, I've told you already about a couple incidents where I fell off my chair, and these epiphanous moments, this knocked me off my chair. Because it seems to me that what's happening is we are being called through this ritual, which was an ancient ritual that is so contemporary and so urgently needed in our time, not just in the form of circles, though I can talk about that and how we can implement this in the form of circles if you like, because I just did that at home. But I believe that the idea of this ritual is a call to us that we can and we must find our way to each other, see each other at exactly these moments of great vulnerability. And that is precisely what angels in our traditions do. The angels come to us in times when we're in great pain, and they make themselves known to us through acts of love that help us find our way. And I believe that part of what we are to learn from this is that we are to embody those angels, that each of us is called into sacred encounter, into sacred accompaniment, so that we too can do the work of the angels.
Amazing. Yeah. If you were not on your phone signing up for Hebrew classes, I don't know who you are. 'Cause, yeah, stunning. Like, it's stunning.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask. I think this is like a yes or no question, and then I'm going to ask you a couple. I'm going to just read a couple of these to you, and then kind of take what you want, because we're pretty close to signing time, and I know people want to talk to you personally. So I think this is a yes or no. Is the tradition of greeting a mourner at Kabbalat Shabbat derived from the Mishnah you cite?
Oh, that's a great question. It's not derived from that Mishnah. I'm just going to translate that for the people in the room who are deep in the weeds of Jewish ritual. There's a tradition, and in fact, instead of just giving you the yes or no, you can't ask a rabbi for a yes or no answer. The answer is no, but I'm going to tell you a story. One of the chapters of the book is about joy and pain, how we can hold sorrow and celebration with one heart, and how we must. The rabbis were very concerned about sorrow and celebration because they worried that the heart couldn't hold all of it at once. In my experience as a pastor, and I'm curious about yours, I have found that our hearts must hold sorrow and celebration at once all the time. In fact, if we are awake in the world, there's always sorrow and there's always celebration. And part of what it means to be human is to be awake to each other's pain, and also to remember to experience joy, even in the midst of the darkest hours. So the ritual of that the person who asked this question is referring to is that there's a part of the Friday night service, the Shabbat service, that is just extremely joyous. Like in some places, I don't know what they do at the temple, but in some places, people get up and they're dancing around because it's so joyous. We've just reached Shabbat, the moment where we put aside the work of the week and we dream again about what the world could actually look like, and we're filled with joy and hope and possibility. And right after that, the mourners, if there are mourners, if people lost loved ones that week, they enter the room. And the whole community turns from joy to grief, and we say, may you be blessed by the Holy One. May you be comforted among all of those who are brokenhearted. Something very similar to what they say in this ritual. So it might be in some way derivative, but I don't know that the practice, I would necessarily look back. I don't know that the people who originated this practice would cite that Mishnah and that ritual as its origin. So in the book, I share this story that when I was I was in a rabbinic fellowship. I had just become a rabbi, and I was in a big, vibrant synagogue in New York City. And we were in the service for Lecha Dodi, for this part of the service where everyone's dancing, singing, dancing. And someone came up to me in the middle of all of this and kind of says in my ear, Rabbi, I have a halachic question, which means I have a legal question for you. I really want to dance, but my mother died this week. Am I allowed to dance? And I was a brand new, fresh out of seminary, and I started spinning. Oh my God, they're not even supposed to be in the room, because the rabbis thought you shouldn't be in the room, so you shouldn't have that kind of spiritual dissonance between joy and okay. She shouldn't even be here. Clearly, I can't tell her to leave. That would be rude. At the same time, she really shouldn't be dancing because she's a mourner. And in fact, it's the first week of mourning. And you're not really supposed to go to those kinds of celebrations for a whole year after a loss. On the other hand, our mourning is suspended on Shabbat. So I'm thinking like a Jewish lawyer, which we call rabbi. And so I'm trying to get it right, and I'm stuck. And I finally just did the sensible thing, which is I said to her, you should go ask the senior rabbi. So she goes over, and I just see her going like this into his ear, and he just takes his arms, and he's draped in this beautiful talit, and he just wraps her up like Ed Bacon would with love, and he just holds her and she starts to cry. And I realized that this woman came to me asking a legal question, but what she really wanted was somebody who should care about her broken heart to know that her heart was broken. But people don't know how to ask that often. And so she was trying to signal to me, but I was too scared. I couldn't take it in. And so it kind of attuned me to like how hard it is to actually ask for help when we really need it. And how imperative it is sometimes, because she really did need to dance and also to cry. And I was talking earlier about, like stretching the walls of our faith institutions so that they can bring in the people who usually are on the margins or left outside. And this is one of those moments where, like, I have realized that through experiences when there's such profound grief in the room and then there's so much joy in the room, I've thought, my God, can the walls of this institution hold this much joy and this much pain? And the walls hold. And I've wondered, can our hearts hold this much joy and pain? Can we be present to a congregant who's experiencing tragic, traumatic death of a loved one, and at the same time celebrate someone else who just fell in love? And our hearts don't collapse either. In fact, they grow stronger because we're able to see more of the human experience. And so I'm always trying to find a way to attach more to the joy and more to the pain. And if I can say one more thing, because I know you're worried about time.
Well, not worried.
I want to lift up the name of one of my beloved friends and mentors, Shifra Bronznik, who lives in New York City. And Shifra, I mention her a couple times in the book, but at the end of the book, I have 8 spiritual practices, one for each chapter of the book. And so Shifra fell in love with the most wonderful man in the world, and they were perfect for each other. And it was a kind of later in life love, and they were intended to live like the rest of their days together. And then he got diagnosed with a terminal lung cancer, and they had only had a few years together, and it progressed very quickly, and he died within only a few months. And she was deeply bereaved, and I mean, she was so devastated. And then she called me one day and she said, Sharon, she said, it doesn't feel right for me to be like this grieving widow in sackcloth and ashes. Like, it doesn't suit Michael. She said, I fell in love with him because he was full of joy, because he talked to everyone, he was laughing all the time, he was just a delight to be around, and I want to grieve him with joy. And so she actually created this practice where she set her clock for 18 minutes a day, and she calls it a joy break. And she said, I am taking a joy break as an expression of my grief to honor Michael for who he was in the world. And during these 18 minutes, she will do whatever will make her happy, like eat a whole chocolate cake, or like she tells me she like blasts music in her apartment and dances around her apartment, or goes for a walk with a friend, or goes out into nature. But she insists on experiencing 18 minutes of joy. And I told her 18 minutes because for Jews that means that's the more numeric equivalent of life. And so this is the way of affirming his life through joy and through love. And so in solidarity, I've taken on the 18 minutes of joy too, which is how I justify eating all the things I should really. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll have another bag of chocolate-covered pretzels for Michael. So in Michael's memory. But we can do this too. And like, this is one way to remind us that we can hold joy even in the midst of our sorrow, and we must. Joy is a choice, and it's a choice that we have to make, that you can't have justice without joy.
Amen.
We cannot sustain ourselves for the long battles that we need to fight if we don't allow ourselves to also experience joy.
Well, this connects a couple of questions we have that I'll read them both, a couple of these, and I think it puts it together. One, at St. Luke's, there's been a lot of loss in our community in the last couple of years, and a lot just this year, and some tragic diagnoses. And we've been, like, I'm aware that this room holds a lot of grief in it, and a community that knows well how to stay with each other in that grief. But the complexity of the moment is what I'm hearing, and in these questions, I hear the same complexity. And there's two, and this is about kind of a more social version. In your chapter on wonder, you give examples of meeting with people of conflicting beliefs. Can you give advice on how to continue dialogue with people who are extolling extreme beliefs that harm others? And connected to that, there's a question of how has your thinking changed since October 7th?
Yeah, sure. So first, I'll just take a step back from that and say that, as I mentioned, I closed the manuscript long before the world as it is. I wrote this in the world as it was. After I closed the manuscript, my father died. He died just before Rosh Hashanah of this year, just before the High Holy Days. And I couldn't grieve, really, because I'm a rabbi and had to, move very quickly from Shiva into the High Holy Days. In fact, our period of grief was cut short by the holidays, again, because the rabbis were afraid that it was too much to ask us to hold grief and joy at once. I thought, okay, I'll celebrate after the holidays. That's a thing for Jews. Acharei Chagim. It's like anyone who wants to make a lunch date, you're like, okay, we'll do it after the holidays. The holidays end. The holidays ended on October 8th. So that is a kind of prolonged, suspended grief, personal grief. And then all the new grief, anguish, shock, horror, fear, sorrow. So when I went into the recording booth to record the audio book in November, it was my first time re-encountering the manuscript since October 7th and since my father's death. And I was really worried because to be honest with you, I wrote the book as a person who enters and turns to the right. I mean, I had been very blessed that for most of my life, while I've had loss, most of my life I was a caregiver and not the person who was being cared for. So I was worried, like, would it not hold? And I have to say, post October 7th, many Jews in the world felt like and feel like we're turning to the left now. And especially for white passing Jews in America, for many, many years, we felt like we were turning to the right and keeping our eyes up and thinking, how can we be good allies? Who needs support? What can we do to be, to be part of the social fabric in a responsible way? And then all of a sudden, we're the ones whose hearts are also full of sorrow, and we're turning this way. So when I read the manuscript, I realized that, first of all, thank God, the book still holds. I think the wisdom holds. And the reason why is because it's not my wisdom, it's ancient wisdom. I didn't make it up. I just am translating it for our time. And the rabbis who created this ritual and wrote about the ritual really understood the human condition. They understood what it means to be repelled by other people's suffering. They understood what it means to be, so vulnerable that you don't want to go near people when exactly what your heart needs is to be held by people. Okay, so I'm really grateful for that. In the 8th chapter, so the first 7 chapters of the book are about all the reasons why it's hard to do this when the person who's brokenhearted is grieving a loss or ill, etc. In the 8th chapter, I reveal that a close look at this text actually shows that they offer 2 examples of the kind of people who would turn to the left. The first is the mourner, which I extrapolate from the mourner to mean anyone who's brokenhearted. The second example that comes from the Mishnah is called a menudeh. The menudeh is an ostracized person. This is a person who has caused grave harm to the community because of his views or his actions or his words. The person is one step short of excommunication. So there are restrictions on our engagement with the menudeh. We are not to count him in a prayer quorum. We are not to invite him over for Shabbos dinner. We are not to stand within 6 feet. We socially distance from a menudeh. This is 2,000 years old, okay? And yet, on that pilgrimage day, the menudeh, the ostracized, also goes up to Jerusalem, also walks up to the Temple Mount, and turns to the left with the brokenhearted. And when that person is confronted by the crowd asks that person to malach, what does the world look like from your vantage point? Where does your hurt come from? And that person answers saying, I've been ostracized And that means, because they had a perfect criminal justice system back then, not like now, that means that that person did harm. And yet, they receive a blessing. Because the people who are going this way see them in their humanity, approach them with curiosity and with compassion, and hold them in their own brokenness. And so the challenge of chapter 8 is to figure out what we do when the person is not coming toward us, but maybe coming at us. Can we hold compassion? Can we hold curiosity? Can we hold wonder about the other? And in that, I'll share with you one, there are a lot of stories in that chapter where I've tried to do this, sometimes failed, sometimes maybe succeeded. But one of the stories that I share in that story, in that chapter, is about a beloved community member of mine called Hannah. And Hannah is a gay Jew whose family is Orthodox and lives in Jerusalem. So she and her wife, Kathleen, went to Jerusalem for a family bat mitzvah, her niece's bat mitzvah. They got there a couple of days early in time for the Pride Parade in Jerusalem. It's a very big deal, the Pride Parade in Jerusalem. There's a huge Pride Parade in Tel Aviv, but in Jerusalem, it's very tense and fraught, and there's so many different kinds of religious communities there, and so it's a really big deal when there's a Pride Parade in Jerusalem. So they went and they were marching. That day, there was a man released from prison. He had served 10 years in prison. He was a Jewish religious extremist because 10 years earlier, he had attempted to murder somebody at the Pride Parade in Jerusalem. He got out of prison and went to the Pride Parade in Jerusalem that day and took out a knife and stabbed a 16-year-old girl in the back. This girl, a young Jewish Israeli girl named Sharon, who was an LGBTQ ally, eventually she would succumb to her wounds, and she died a couple of days later. My congregants, Hannah and Kathleen, were 10 feet away when this happened. They witnessed a murder. So they were completely traumatized and shaken up. They go to the Shabbat dinner the next night, and they're sitting at these long tables with the whole extended family. And seated across from Hannah is this young guy who she grew up with, who was a very sweet guy when they were kids, who's become radicalized. And he's engaged in all kinds of vandalism and violence, and he's more outraged by the fact of the desecration of the holy city by the Pride Parade than he is by this murder. And Hannah is like, how can I even be in the room with this guy? Like, get me out of here. And I know we've all had that feeling before when you're talking to somebody and you realize that they're on the other side of history and you're like, I can't be even in proximity to this person. And she wants to leave. But then she starts to get really curious about him, and she starts to wonder, like, what happened to him? He used to be a sweet kid. Like, who got into his head? How did he start to think and see the world this way? What's wrong with him? And she's struck by this curiosity, and she keeps asking these questions. Finally, she stands up, and she clinks her glass, and she offers a toast. She doesn't say a word to this guy, who I call Asher in the book, not his real name. She instead talks to the bat mitzvah girl, and she says, you are living in a place and a time where it is absolutely essential that you remember Jewish history, Torah, and Jewish values. Your voice matters here, and you are part of a long legacy of people fighting for justice, for equity, for equality, and for peace. Use your voice and make a difference. Okay. The weekend ends, a few days go by, and this guy, who I call Asher, not his real name, calls Hannah's family and says that his life has been turned upside down by his encounter with Hannah, who did not say a word to him, but he said, I haven't slept for days because I keep thinking, I just spent Shabbat with a lesbian. And he said, and I keep thinking, would I have wanted anything to happen to her? Of course not. She seemed like a lovely person. He's like, now I don't know what to do with my life. And one question leads to another, 2 years later, this guy is at the Pride Parade with a rainbow kippah, holding a flag that says, love wins. And Hannah says, what I accomplished was only one thing, not getting up from the table. She said, all I wanted to do in the world was leave, but she said, I grew up as a gay Orthodox Jew, so I have a super high tolerance for intolerance. She said, I figured it out, I stayed at the table, and then, this is a great story, it's in my book, I closed the manuscript, a few months go by, and Hannah calls me in the summer, and she said, oh my God, open the Jerusalem Report, it was a big story on the Pride Parade this year, and that guy is the face of the Pride Parade. He's literally got 2 kids, like one with the kid on the shoulders with the trans flag, and one with the kid in the pushki, but his life has changed. Like, he's a different guy now because this woman was willing to just sit with him and be curious about him and actually see him as a person who had gone down a path that was a path of pain, but that she understood that at core he was just a person. And so if we can do that safely, and not everyone can do that safely all the time, I think we must. I think that's the only way that people actually change. It's not by engaging in counter-protests, it's not by fighting on Instagram, it's by seeing each other's humanity and recognizing it that at our hearts, all of us have sorrow, immense, immeasurable sorrow. And if we can meet sorrow with sorrow, then it's not like we're coming at each other. It's like we're all brokenhearted. And we're just seeing each other's pain and seeing how our pain informs who we are becoming.
We have just blown through time like it doesn't exist. So what we're going to do next is we're about to bring out a table right here, and we're going to bring out some pens, and Rabbi Brous is going to sit there in just a moment. We've got just a moment to do that. And then they're going to, again, these brilliant ushers that we have are going to make that all work really beautifully somehow, and then we're going to go that way. While we set that, Matthew's going to lead us in some singing. And did you want to read something before?
Can I do one thing first?
Can I ask you to do 2 things?
Yeah.
Will you read the story in English at the
sure.
end, and then you're going to read your prayer, and then we're going to do the music.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So Reverend Verghese asked if I would just share that this is how you'll hear it's really a 3-line text. This is the origin of the whole circling ritual. So this is what it says. This is from Mishnah Midot 2:2 for those who are curious. All who entered the Temple Mount entered by the right, circled to the right, and exited by the left, except for one to whom something had happened, who entered and circled to the left. That person was asked, why do you circle to the left? And they replied, I am a mourner, and they were blessed. May the one who dwells in this house comfort you. If they replied, because I have been ostracized, then they too were blessed. May the one who dwells in this house inspire your community to draw near to you again, according to Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Yossi challenged him and said, you're making it seem like the community's treating him unjustly, so instead they should bless. May the one who dwells in this house inspire you to hear the words of your community so that they may bring you close again. And despite the dispute between these 2 rabbis, the critical piece here is that that person deserves a blessing. And if I may point out, it's not a blessing from the high priest, it's not a blessing from the rabbis, it's a blessing from the people. Like, we bless each other. We are the source of blessing. So in that spirit, I want to just, if I may, I want to invite us to close like this. So I mentioned that my father died just before Rosh Hashanah, and the period prescribed for mourners for a parent is a year. And so I'm saying Mourner's Kaddish, this prayer that is at the heart of the book. You'll learn more about it in chapter 1. And you need to say this prayer with others. You can't say it alone, because the very essence of it is that there have to be other people who can say, Amen. I see you. I'm not running away from your pain. And so as I've been on this book tour, I realize it's very hard for me to find like a minyan or synagogue that I can run to get on time. So I would like to ask if I can say that prayer here. It's about 90 seconds or shorter. And I'm also certain that I'm not the only mourner in this space. So I would like to ask if somebody is holding a broken heart right now, if you have a loved one who's died, or if you are marking an anniversary of a death of a loved one, if you would just stand for a moment with me. And if you can also say, thank you. Thank you. Wow. And I'm going to ask everyone else to stay seated and just look around for a moment, because you know that expression, be kind, for you have no idea what kind of storm is raging beneath the surface for another. So when we have broken hearts, we might look like everybody else, but we're not like everybody else right now. And in the old times, you could actually see, but nowadays, it's harder to tell. So I just want to invite you to take a look, and afterwards, when we're done, if someone's near you who's standing, to just go over and say, do you want to tell me about the person you're holding? You want to tell me the name of your loved one? Why does your heart hurt? Malach, what happened to you? And in this way, we can hold each other as we navigate some of the hardest moments in life. So I'm going to say the words of Mourner's Kaddish, and for the rest of you, whether you understand the Aramaic or not, what I would love is if you could just say Amen. And we say it not once, we say it again and again and again, because Amen, Amen, Amen. You can say Amen also, feel free. But what we say is like, I see you, I see you, I see you. It is relentless love that we need, and relentless love that we have the power to give. Yitkadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbi. B'alma divrei chirutei v'yamnich machutei b'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael b'agalat v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbi mevorach le'olam u'me'omaya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitrumam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ilam min kol birchata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechemata da'amiram be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama Rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu ve'al Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Thank you all so much.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving, to be a living sanctuary for Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Amen.